welcome to the webinar. Thanks very much for attending today. We really appreciate your time. As was on the slide before, we are recording the event, so you will be sent a copy of that shortly after the event is finished in an email. So today I'm here, I'm Ian Loman, I'm a cloud expert at Adepteq. I've been working in SharePoint since its inception, really. And the same with the Microsoft Cloud, because when it was launched in 2007, SharePoint was a key part of that initial Microsoft suite. In our time, we've been working with ShareGate for quite a while now, doing migrations. So we're doing this webinar today to help you understand what's happening with SharePoint Server going end of life and the options that are available to you. So I'd like to welcome Charles alongside me today, who's a solution advisor at ShareGate, and he's been working with them since 2017, helping organisations maximise the value that ShareGate gives them in managing their Microsoft 365 environments. He's got a deep product knowledge and a keen understanding of the IT challenges that organisations face, working closely with both partners and customers to streamline that Microsoft 365 management, optimise your migrations, and enhance your government strategies. So who are Adepteq? Well, we're a Microsoft Solutions partner for modern work, which we're really proud of. That puts us in the top 2% of Microsoft partners in the UK. And we've been working in that environment for many years. We've worked with ShareGate for over 10 years now, using their migration tool and also the reporting and permissions management side of things. Over that time, we've done thousands of successful SharePoint migrations, from very small people moving from a shared drive into SharePoint to large complex migrations of server to server, or from competing products into SharePoint, it's SharePoint Server or SharePoint Online. So we've got a breadth of information there. So if I now hand you over to Charles, who'll explain who ShareGate are.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having invited me, guys. Ian did a great job at the introductions. I've been at ShareGate for over 8 years doing what Ian explained. I've went through different roles in customer support, customer success, working now as a solution advisor, with our partner ecosystem. Now, who are ShareGate? Well, ShareGate is a bunch of people, but it's also a company and a product founded in 2009 in Montreal. That's now trusted by over 75,000 IT professionals worldwide. And recent numbers show that about 3 petabytes of data gets migrated with ShareGate every month. And, well, why are we here today? You'll ask. Well, we've hinted to it. Microsoft is ending the extended support for SharePoint 2016 and 2019 in about 16 months. Well, July 2026. So it's coming rather quickly, and therefore organizations must prepare now to avoid business disruptions. Since Microsoft is phasing out support for these versions, it's becoming essential to understand what this means for you and why now is the perfect time to consider moving to the cloud. So in the next 45 minutes, we're going to be discussing the risks of staying on unsupported environments, the benefits of moving to the cloud, and also strategies to ensure a smooth transition. That's what we're going to be talking about. We will take a moment. We mentioned it earlier that there's a Q&A. Feel free to put in your questions there so that we can take a moment to answer them at the end of the session. Now, let's get started with the risks of staying on unsupported platforms. Once Microsoft stops providing the updates, well, organizations will face important risks. There's several. I've categorized them into 3 different, categories, we could say. And the first is security and compliance risks. There are no security patches or updates coming once the end of life has been reached, meaning that for a lot of organizations, your environment becomes a prime target for cyber attacks. I always think it sounds funny. It's kind of movie-like, but it's actually true. Imagine being hit by a ransomware attack due to an unpatched vulnerability. That's a possible consequence of not getting those patches and updates. With a similar situation, you could end up with data encrypted, little to no support from Microsoft really to help restore it. So what are you going to do? Go to authorities? Yes, that's a good reflex. Are you going to pay the ransom to get the money back? Is there any guarantee that this is going to come back? These are risks that are really important to consider. You also have increased compliance risks. There are many regulations. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with GDPR or UK GDPR more specifically that require businesses to use supported and secure software. If SharePoint Server is unsupported, well, you can't ensure compliance. If you can't ensure compliance, this can lead to legal penalties and, to an extent, after a little bit of time, a loss of business trust. And sometimes it's just that major event that could have a big impact. Because everyone will agree, regulatory requirements just don't pause because your system is reached its end of life. It's really important to keep that in mind. Without compliance support and the updates of top of the line security, your organizations risk hefty fines and reputational damage. The key takeaway for the security and compliance risks, I guess, are that running unsupported software is a little bit like leaving your front door open for hackers and even regulators. Without security updates, the compliance support, organizations are exposed to major risks and fines. So this is the first thing that comes to mind when you're thinking of what's the problem if I stay on my old SharePoint server? Well, these are the kinds of security and compliance risks that you are bound to face. And even though the risks may be a certain percentage, high or little, the risk is there. And if it happens, the consequences are rather important. So that's the first part, security and compliance risks. Ian, I'm curious, we had a bit of a conversation earlier. You've mentioned that some organizations may be sticking to very limited on-premises servers that only their organization have access to. In what sense does that not necessarily, or how does this impact the security and compliance risk that we're talking about?
Well, yeah, if your SharePoint server is only on your network and is not extended externally, so people can't access it through VPNs, or you've shared access externally with people outside of your organizations, then you have a lower impact or lower chance of hacking happening. Right. But you would still suffer from not having those patches, because if something breaks within that SharePoint environment, there won't be anybody to fix it. You can't go run into Microsoft because something's broke, because they no longer support it. So although from a hacking aspect you might be in a better position if you've ring-fenced as such your environment, you could still suffer from a failure of something and it's unsupported now.
Right. No, 100%. So the security and compliance risk may not be the top priority or top concern for everyone, but it is still a rather important one. All right, excellent. Thank you. Well, there are a few more risks that we thought about. The second category that I've used are operational and business risks. I was thinking about ransomware attack, but also imagine your SharePoint environment goes down and you have no vendor support. That's what Ian was hinting to just now. It's your IT team that's left to solve the critical issues on their own, leading to downtime and potential data loss, which can be costly, not only in terms of money, but in terms of reputation. It's an example of operational and business risks that come with staying behind. Once again, if something goes wrong, data corruption, integration failures, system crashes, Microsoft won't help because the product is no longer supported. It's your IT team that was going to have to troubleshoot everything on their own, which increases downtime and operational costs. Not to mention, if you actually reach out to a third-party vendor to actually, I've been saying actually a lot now, but if you do reach out to a third-party organization to help you, these are additional costs that you have to consider. And, a very important one is also the risk of losing business critical data with no recovery option. It's a nightmare scenario. Without the support of Microsoft, you are left vulnerable to permanent data loss, and no one can really afford that kind of thing. So takeaway here is that technology evolves, but the outdated systems don't. Over time, you're ending up with slower systems, more bugs, less efficiency, and really an unsupported SharePoint version can't keep up with modern tools. If we're evolving, there's lots of new features and functionalities that your end users are going to want to use, but they're not going to be available or won't really integrate with the older system. So it reduces efficiency and even employee experience. Another type of risk that I've identified are financial and productivity risk. They kind of tie into what we've been discussing, but maintaining the outdated systems is often more costly, expensive than upgrading to a modern one. because your IT teams will actually end up spending more time and money on troubleshooting, maintaining servers, patching security issues manually. And don't forget that you're losing scalability. I just said it, your business evolves, but your outdated platform don't. They're not going to keep up. So you're essentially putting a cap on your business growth or your organization's ability to grow and adapt. So this is what I guess we could kind of summarize as operational efficiency. It takes a hit. The unsupported software could lead to performance issues, downtime, higher maintenance costs once again. Not to mention that difficulty of integrating with the newer tools, or really sometimes just not have a possibility of integrating with the newer tools as technology evolves, and so does your business. Ian, I'm curious. I'm setting it back to you a little bit on this case. I was reading, and I wondered to what extent does that prove right in your experience? Many organizations think that staying on old versions saves them money because it's paid for already. But I believe that in reality, the IT costs tend to skyrocket as they scramble to maintain the outdated system. Is that what you've seen through your experience with your own customers?
Yeah, pretty much in the UK, what we've seen is that there was those early adopters that saw the benefits of the cloud quite early on and wanted to move their estates into there. And then we had the pandemic rush, where organizations needed to get data into the cloud quickly. So moving from shared drives into SharePoint Online, or moving from SharePoint Server into SharePoint Online, was quite big. We did a lot of projects around that. And then as that hybrid working model has now matured, having stuff on servers is expensive, because not only have you got the update and maintenance of those servers, the costs of running them, the electricity especially that's constantly going up, you've also got to maintain those VPNs and access for people that are wherever they might be working. Whereas with the online world, everything's accessed through your browser immediately. So you're adding that level of flexibility in straight away. But as you said about paid for, you say, oh, people have already paid. I've already paid for SharePoint Server. But yes, it's amazing how many clients we talk to that have SharePoint Server environments, but also have Microsoft 365. So effectively, they've got two versions of SharePoint available to them, but they're still using the older version rather than the new. So often there is no real licensing cost to move to online because they've already got Microsoft 365. It's just the professional services and maybe tools like ShareGate to assist them to do it.
So my thoughts were actually pretty accurate. Excellent. Thank you once again. Well, you've hinted to it now. What do you do if you want to avoid these security risks? What's the solution? Well, moving to the cloud offers a host of benefits that can mitigate the security, operational, financial, compliance risks, productivity, all those that we've just mentioned. And it's really going to help you be set up for a long-term success. If we go back to security and compliance again, well, Microsoft Cloud offerings come with built-in enterprise-grade security features. You're really always protected against the latest threats. Those regular Microsoft updates and security patches come, all the time. Unlike on-premises SharePoint servers, the SharePoint Online environment within the greater Microsoft 365 cloud receives continuous security updates. For Microsoft, obviously, to mitigate the risks of cyber attacks and just make sure everything is up to date against whatever can come up, because technology evolves so quickly, and so do hackers. But you also have other products within Microsoft 365, like Microsoft Defender for advanced threat protection, that will detect phishing attempts, malware, and zero-day threats before they reach your users. Furthermore, within the cloud, you have integrated governance tools. You have Microsoft Purview with information protection. It classifies and labels information, sensitive information mostly, with what is being called Microsoft sensitivity labels. I've heard a lot of people ask me questions. Well, I've heard them ask me the questions they were talking to me, but I mean, I've been representing ShareGate at a few conferences over the last few years, but especially last fall and even a bit earlier last summer, people were really getting into Purview and sensitivity labels. And this is probably what's the this is my personal impression, what's growing most in terms of security for end users and organizations within the cloud. With Purview, you also get encryption and restricted access controls that ensures security through Azure information protection and role-based access. So depending on a label on the file, if you're not part of a specific group to give you the access, you're not going to be able to get it. So it's to get to the file. And if you're not able to get there, well, it means that it served its purpose and it's protecting your environment. It's protecting your data. There's also another feature in Purview that's privacy risk management, or I think it just changed a little bit. I was searching last night actually, and I have a blank on how it was called, but it's really another tool that will provide you a way to manage personal data in compliance with regulations like GDPR. When you have Purview that can scan your environment to identify where you have PII and social security numbers and information that should not be made available, it's able to detect it automatically as it scans your environment, and even auto label with the customize, or I guess set up the labels that you find are the most appropriate for this kind of use case. So the Microsoft 365 Cloud and SharePoint Online really eliminates security blind spots by providing automatic updates, threat protection, compliance controls that end up also reducing the burden of IT teams that can focus on more value-added activities. The cloud also brings you scalability and cost savings. Ian was into it earlier, but instead of being capped, the cloud grows with your business. So whether you need more storage, advanced features, enhanced collaboration tool, it's all available on demand. So within the cost savings, well, you have the fact that it's a subscription-based pricing. You only pay for what you use. You reduce waste compared to the fixed on-prem licensing. Plus, the subscription model means predictable expenses. You know exactly what you have to pay, and since a lot of organizations are already hybrid, they have an on-prem environment still, but they already went to the cloud. They maybe are using Teams, and they have some Microsoft 365 licenses already. Maybe not for everyone, or maybe not the full licensing, but the increase in costs for your licensing is sometimes very little because you're already there. So it kind of ties into your cost savings. You also have flexible storage and expansion capabilities. You have setups in OneDrive or SharePoint sites that can auto scale and add storage, or once you reach storage, moves content to secure archive, so that you are really in control of how you're spending the data, or not spending your data, but spending money on archiving or hosting data, as simple as that. And then you get the reduced infrastructure costs. Ian also hinted to that earlier. There's no need to maintain an on-premises server anymore. You don't have a physical server. You don't need to buy it. Well, you've probably bought it in the past, but it's there already, and now you don't need it anymore. There's no hardware to maintain. There's lower energy bills because you're not powering these machines. You don't need to cool the room where your servers are found. So you actually reduce some of those costs as well. And there are more advantages. Think of collaboration. People think of Microsoft 365. I'm sure they right away think of Teams and co-authoring and how you can actually work seamlessly wherever you are. So it enables real-time collaboration across teams, but also across geographies. Wherever you are on the planet, you can get to your files. So it's increasingly important today, especially with the hybrid workplace that's not leaving, right? So SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams allow users to access content from anywhere at any time. No need for virtual machines and remote access. You just need to have a secure authentication to your environment. In there, you have loop components. Those have been testing out, and they're great because you could work live with your colleagues. It's co-editable content that can be embedded across different services. Yeah, I've tried this once, more than once, but in Teams meetings, you could create your meeting notes could become a loop component. Everyone can work on them, and you could decide to forward this to an Outlook message or to a SharePoint site, and it's still the same component that gets updated across all those services simultaneously. It's really useful. But then also the cloud gives you additional sharing capabilities that are even more secure with the ways that Microsoft is creating sharing links that are kind of tunnels to a specific location that only the person receiving that link, well, if you set up specific user sharing, if you use anonymous sharing, that's another story, but generally speaking, the collaboration with external users is extremely secure within the Microsoft cloud. There's another one that's a really significant advantage, and we can't really ignore that. It's Copilot. You're not going to get Copilot on-prem. You're not going to go get Copilot anywhere else but in the Microsoft cloud. And I don't know for you guys, but for me, the hype is still strong. I hear about it all the time, and I give it a few tries. I also go with competition as well. But really, Copilot is really a tool that's worth embracing. Because it integrates seamlessly with tools like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, Teams. Copilot enables users to focus on high-value activities, transforming workflows and boosting efficiency. I'm sure lots of you have given a try and seen how it can actually impact your productivity. There's automation of repetitive tasks. There's enhanced data analysis, improved content creation. This one I'm guilty of using. I've prepared this presentation, asking a few prompts to get the draft going. Then I fine-tune, then ask for clarity. It's amazing how Copilot aids you in generating content drafts, suggesting edits, enhancing clarity in Word, PowerPoint, and wherever you can use it. And it streamlines the creation of reports, presentations, and it ensures consistency and even professionalism, because you can ask for the voice and tone and so many different criteria when you are engaging with AI, that it's up to you to make it as valuable as possible for your use case. But there's so many use cases that it's really, I think, completely changing how people work and having a wonderful impact on productivity. One of the other features I use a lot, and I don't want to turn this into a Copilot promotion, but meeting efficiency is really impacted by Copilot. Getting your meeting summarized, the highlights, the action items, even some cases getting, your follow-up email almost all written for you. It's crazy how it facilitates efficient collaboration and follow-ups. And if you still wonder whether those Copilot licenses are worth it, I'm going to try not to stumble here, but I did find a study, a Forrester's new technology projected total economic impact of Microsoft 365 Copilot on small and medium businesses. It's a study that was commissioned by Microsoft with Forrester, but mostly the key takeaway that I got out of the whole presentation, and we'll be able to share that in the follow-up emails or so that you can get to it. But the key takeaway was return on investment was ranging from 132 to 353% over a 3-year period. So moving to the cloud, getting Copilot licenses does really enhance collaboration and productivity, and will really help you optimize, costs and investments. Plus, with the cloud, you always have kind of a step ahead, or you're a bit of a step ahead, because Microsoft continuously enhances cloud capabilities, ensuring that businesses stay ahead of the latest trends and innovation. So moving to the cloud does host a very good deal of benefits. Ian, I'm wondering, this is what we had discussed, this is what we put on slides. Do you have anything else in mind that could be another advantage of moving to the cloud for partners and customers?
Yeah, one of the key things we find is that becomes that central hub of your organization. So the way that SharePoint Server was originally proposed as that, it's still a standalone product that other things have to connect to. You have to connect your Exchange server to it. You have to connect your Office web app server to it, and people, have to open things, and it's not necessarily as smooth. Where you've got that central hub in 365, everything's in that one tenant. So that's where, again, the benefits of Copilot come in, because you can interrogate everything in your tenant. If you're currently using 365 but have SharePoint Server separate, that content can't be interrogated by Copilot and brought back in your answers currently. So going forward, it's great to have everything in that one pot. that your admin team are already comfortable in managing.
Wonderful. I'm sure there's more that we could think about if we continue talking. This probably gives a great summary of those main benefits of making the move from the on-prem to the online environment with Microsoft 365. So we know now of the risks of staying behind, and I've gone over those main benefits of moving to the cloud. But how do you get there? How do you make that transition seamless? Because it's really important to understand that migrating from SharePoint 2016 or 2019 to SharePoint Online is not a simple lift and shift. Yes, we want to make the transition seamless, but gone are the days of just database detach, attach, and merely replicating the source, because that can lead to missed opportunities for optimization, adapting with the newer ways of working, and very likely misalignment with the business needs and what does the business want to achieve in a greater goal. So when you're planning your migration, it's crucial to identify the features, functionalities that may not transition seamlessly due to differences between those platforms. I've come up with a list of key elements to prepare for. Some common challenges in migration. Well, you have on-prem solutions, full trust farm solutions that have custom codes, or sandbox solutions are deprecated. They're not supported in SharePoint Online. There are maybe some alternatives, but it's not something that people explore that much. What also is very common are site customizations. Now, thinking about the save your site as a template feature that you might have been using on-prem servers. Well, it's not supported in modern SharePoint Online sites. So most of your custom site templates from SharePoint 2016, likely 2019 as well, will require development or redevelopment. Same thing for customized master pages and page layouts. Those customized master pages are not compatible with SharePoint Online's modern experience. The way ASPX pages were configured back then versus now is not the same. It's not compatible. I've seen it so many times talking to customers where I did a migration. I brought that site over to SharePoint Online and it doesn't look modern, but I used the modern template. Well, the ASPX page still has the old configurations. So when SharePoint Online gets that ASPX page, it thinks it's a classic page. It will kind of revert to classic, at least in the look and feel, but not in the experience. Not everything is going to work out as expected, and that's why these are other features that you're going to have to plan for redevelopment. So maybe probably recreating them from scratch, and at that point, it's recommended to use the default modern templates and the customization available from Microsoft tools within those, and not try to basically almost kind of fit a square peg into a round hole when you try to move the classic to modern site templates. Not that a classic to modern migration is impossible, but those master pages, those site templates are going to be a bit more of a challenge. You also have a few deprecated features. We can think of InfoPath for services. They're still supported. InfoPath is available within SharePoint Online, but only in the classic experience. You have to return your list to classic look and feel for them to work, but it's discouraged to use them because I can't remember the date, but InfoPath is bound to be deprecated as well in the near future. I think it's roughly at the same time as the 2016 and 19 end of life or end of support. So that's one more thing that you're going to have to think of. And there's not a lot of tools. ShareGate is not able to migrate a InfoPath as something else. So you'll have to consider transitioning to Power Apps or other solutions for any type of form solution. So another aspect of your migration where you have to allocate time to rebuild a few of your components, let's call them. Another deprecated feature, or a couple of deprecated features I could call them, are SharePoint Designer workflows. So the 2010 workflows, you probably know, were already not supported anymore in SharePoint Online, and the 2013 workflows are supported or deprecated and will likely go away. I believe this is also around the same time. And therefore, it's another thing that you have to think about. Workflows should move to Power Automate, but there's no real easy way to convert a workflow to a Power Automate flow. So another thing that needs to be rebuilt. And then you have to think about any third-party integrations. They are third-party. They're not going to migrate. So you need to evaluate, is it compatible? Is it going to work in SharePoint Online? Is there an equivalent? And if so, I need to deploy this prior to the migration so that all the values and information relevant to this third-party application within your SharePoint environment can hopefully make its way to the equivalent features once you've redeployed that third-party solution. This is another thing that you have to keep. Integrations. They are third-party supported anymore in SharePoint Online, and the 2013 workflows are supported or deprecated and will likely go away. I believe this is also around the same time. And therefore, it's another thing that you have to think about. Workflows should move to Power Automate, but there's no real easy way to convert a workflow to a Power Automate flow. So another thing that needs to be rebuilt. And then you have to think about any third-party integrations. They are third-party. They're not going to migrate. So you need to evaluate, is it compatible? Is it going to work in SharePoint Online? Is there an equivalent? And if so, I need to deploy this prior to the migration so that all the values and information relevant to this third-party application within your SharePoint environment can hopefully make its way to the equivalent features once you've redeployed that third-party solution. This is another thing that you have to keep in mind. And there's probably a few more things that come to mind. And that's why it's essential to really do an inventory of your existing features. So really do conduct a thorough audit of your current SharePoint environment to identify all those customizations, the third-party solutions, and all the deprecated features that you're going to have to reconsider and rethink as you do your migration. You have to assess compatibility. Which features indeed can be migrated directly, which can't, which need modification, and which ones may need replacement with other solutions in SharePoint Online. And once again, I've said it a few times, but you do have to plan for redevelopment. You can't just move everything thinking it's going to work. There's all these things that we've talked about that you'll have to consider and allocate resources for recreating and reconfiguring features that are just no longer compatible. The good news, though, is you have free tools. I know that Ian mentioned they use this, the Microsoft SharePoint, with the SharePoint Migration Assessment Tool. It's free. It's available for SharePoint servers, I believe, 2010, 13, and 16. So you could download this on your server, run it, and you'll get basically a list of those challenges. It will help you identify the challenges, get a clearer picture of what you have, and efforts that will be required down the road. There's also ShareGate source analysis, other reports that can be used to build your inventory and highlight this type of information. We have the link that we'll share after, with the recording afterwards of where you can actually download that migration tool if need be. And before I hand it over to Ian, I'm thinking of another common challenge. I've mentioned it on the slide, identifying and cleaning redundant, obsolete, and trivial data. This is a bit of a challenge because it ends up often falling back on end users because businesses struggle to provide a definitive criteria even for themselves or to a third party, an expert like Adepteq doing the services for them. What I've heard that made the most sense in a few engagements is engaging subject matter experts from the business units to lead these efforts. Get your SME, get your SharePoint expert or maybe, identify some of your experts within business units to make sure that they can lead these efforts, talk to their teams, and dedicate some time to remove what's not needed. People tend to actually do the opposite when they hear about migrations and dump everything somewhere that will make sure it gets migrated, but it's obviously not the best. You want to streamline your operations and only migrate what needs to make its way over to the new environment. So if you can get somebody on board to help you before you get to do the migration, this is definitely going to be useful. Ian, I was actually curious, anything in that list that you feel needs maybe a bit more attention or that we have omitted?
Yeah, one of the things that needs to be really considered is your external sharing. So how have you been, if you have been sharing externally, of course, how have you been sharing? If you haven't up until now and your server was ring-fenced in your environment, then you've now got this new opportunity to start sharing things externally. So can consider that in your planning for how your new structure is going to be. But also, if you've got a lot of content shared externally, it's identifying that as well, because of course, how it was shared previously won't work when you move into the online environment. So effectively, it has to be reshared to the users and explain to them how they will access it now. So again, that's something to add to that list to consider, and something that we sort of like work with our clients to go through as well, because they have to then communicate with their external partners and clients as to how to access the information and content going forwards.
Excellent. Well, after you assessed your environment, you need to start moving at some point. But before you actually start moving content around and data around, you need a migration plan. This is one of the essential parts of ensuring a smooth transition. Clear strategy is essential to ensure that smooth transition. Indeed, engaging stakeholders to understand priorities and expectations as you define the migration requirements and milestones ensures alignments with the greater business objectives. So think of aligning with business goals, defining your strategy, running pilot migrations, and then adjusting, executing the migration. But there's one thing I picked up from a previous ShareGate webinar with our colleagues of Spark, another, are they an MSP? I believe they're an MSP, service provider at some point, or consultant. They're based in Canada and the US. But the most important part here is that there was this couple points that I thought would really resonate. Business outcomes and employee experience should drive information architecture. So what you want people to do and what the results you need them to achieve and how employees interact with the data should drive the way you structure this information. How do you make it available? How do you split it per units, per goals, per criteria to define? But it's really important to keep that in mind. I thought, once again, that's what resonate. Business outcomes, employee experience drive the information architecture. And the other one is not necessarily any catchy phrase or anything, but security and compliance are critical. As you do your migration, you have to keep that in mind and you have to plan properly, because especially with the rise of Copilot, that has great benefits. It also quickly exposes flaws in these areas if your migration is not properly planned. Or even if you are already done with your migration and you're launching Copilot, understanding exactly who has access to what, because Copilot we have the same access, is really important. So that's why those couple things should drive all decisions in your migration plan and guide your migration strategy. And in terms of strategy, I had it on the slide: cutover, staged, hybrid. What does that mean, or what do they mean? Well, just very simply, a cutover migration is basically where all data gets migrated in one go, typically during a scheduled downtime or a maintenance window. It's best for small to medium-sized farms or organizations that have small to medium farms and minimal data or users, because it's simple to plan and execute. There's minimal synchronization overhead and planning, because you know that all of this will be migrated. We have a weekend and we're good to go. It does require downtime, which may disrupt businesses. If it's a small business, it's over a weekend, might be plenty, but there's also a higher risk that if an issue arises during this migration, well, you have to stop and rethink and plan for another weekend or another period where you're going to be able to go about the migration. So it's going to have some business disruptions if something goes wrong. But it's still a very simple migration process that we see rather frequently on the smaller scale. Staged migrations are probably the most common. It's where data is migrated in phases, really. Typically, it could be a department or maybe a region or even workloads. I often see this. We start by migrating emails, and then we do OneDrive, and then SharePoint, and then Teams, and whatever else. It depends on business requirements and priorities, but that's probably what we see the most. That's what I've heard happen most commonly. It's best for larger organizations where you can't have any downtime. It does reduce impact on users. It's great because, okay, we can move this, we can move that portion, and it's easier to troubleshoot if you do encounter any issues because you're setting up smaller batches of migration, so each of them is easier to manage, generally speaking. It is a bit more complex in planning and coordination, and there could be potential challenges with maintaining consistency during the migration. And usually it means that you're going to have to run more copies because you do a first migration of this, or maybe workload 1 until you're more or less done. Then you do an incremental copy to make sure everything that's been maybe added or modified on the source in between the initial migration and that cutover for workload A has been covered. Then workload B gets the same migration, and then incrementals. And therefore, you have to plan for more operations. You also end up with a hybrid migration scenario that will not be a mix between cutover and stage, but is more of a migration where you leverage the coexistence between your source on-prem servers and your target environments that allow users to continue working in both during the migration. That's usually something we see where complex environments with a lot of interdependent workloads or organizations that require a seamless user experience. Everyone is allowed to work wherever they need to. Here's the old servers, the new one. So there's minimal disruption for end users, and it's an easier transition for large organizations. You're going to have 2 servers running, your SharePoint on-prem servers and your cloud instance running. Which means that in the cons, I guess, of this approach is that you really require significant planning and expertise. There are higher costs because you maintain your on-prem server for a longer period while you also start working on the other one. And then at some point, you're going to phase out the source server, which means another need for extra incremental copies. So different approaches. What you have to keep in mind are the few, let's call them criteria or considerations when you're choosing your approach. Size and complexity. What's the farm size? How many users need to be migrated? How many workloads? What are the workloads involved? You also have the downtime tolerance. Is your business, can the business even afford some of the downtime or not at all? You have to consider compliance and security risks as well. Where's data residency, permissions, regulatory requirements? These are really important factors. Most migration tools, even SharePoint's Microsoft's free migration tool, ShareGate, and most competition will actually preserve the permissions and ensure smooth transitions in terms of security. You also have to consider resources. That's a given, but still, do you have a migration tool? Do you have the expertise? Do you have the budget? Or will you be reaching out for services? That's really something else that you'll need to consider in picking your approach. And the user experience. You want to minimize disruption for end users. How is that going to chime into your plan? So that's why an experienced partner like Adepteq will help you identify the best approach for you, and that many tools like ShareGate, let's be honest, can support flexible migration strategies, allowing your administrators to handle whatever type of migration you want to do, the incremental or delta copies, workload-specific migrations with ease. There are really a lot of different ways to achieve that, and I'm curious to hear Ian's take on this and maybe present to you what is Adepteq's migration framework. Ian?
Yeah, thanks, Charles. So Adepteq work very much along the lines that Charles said there. So the key thing, first of all, is to spend time with our prospects or existing clients to build a scope of work, as to understand what they've got and what might go wrong. So by using the tools that Charles mentioned, we use those. We deploy that Microsoft tool, or we use ShareGate if ShareGate is going to be the tool that we're using for the migration. And then we look at the reports. So the reports will tell us what might go wrong, where the issues might be, so we can then speak to you about that. One of the things that hasn't been mentioned that does come up a lot is, the user experience, because as Charles said in his, rather than move directly, things are likely to break. So it gives you the opportunity to create a nice new shiny intranet landing page or whatever it might be using the new modern functionality, rather than bring over what you've already got. Once we've got an idea of what it is that you need and we've got a scope of work together, we provide a fixed price proposal to deliver that migration, including whatever tools are required to assist us with that. Then we help you with the strategic planning of it. Who's going to be doing what, when, the time frames for things, which type of migration it's going to be. And as Charles said, the majority of migrations we do now tend to be that we'll do a migration, people test it, and then we do a we do a second delta, and then we refine it, because we know things are going to go wrong, but often you don't know what exactly is going to go wrong. You can't pinpoint everything with these reports. So it's only once you do that test migration, you understand what goes wrong, and then you can start fixing it. And then you do a delta migration, apply your fixes, and keep refining this. It's a very iterative process until you get the outcome that you require. This is where the execution and governance then comes in as well, because although, like Charles said, you can copy permissions across, are your permissions currently the correct permissions? Again, now is the time to review that and to go through to make sure that the people running those teams have got the right people underneath accessing that information. In post-migration support, we can provide, during the migration, we support you all the way through it, and then we have user acceptance testing period at the end, and then you can go into general support with Adepteq if you should choose to, and also we can offer services around the training elements. If you could just move a slide on, please, Charles.
Yes, of course. Here we go.
So one of the key things for us with these things, with these sort of migrations, is the users, to ensure that they understand the changes that have happened and how it's different in their environment. So rather than have vanilla training on SharePoint Online, Adepteq tends to train people on what they now have. So the training would be bespoke based on, you were in this environment doing these things, it's now changed and the changes are this. So this is how it affects you. So we're only talking to people about what they can do and how they can do it in their new environment, rather than give them vanilla training. And it's really keen to keep an eye on that as well. So one of the good things, if you do have ongoing support with Adepteq, we have on our support desk flag where it's user error. So this is really interesting when you pick up if there's regular things that people are doing once they've moved into that new environment. It can then be flagged as a training event that needs, because people just aren't aware of this change or haven't understood how the change has affected them, and they're not using the right method of doing things. So we find, once we've done the test migration, that's a good point to start doing user training, because people have then a bit of familiarity. They understand the environment. It's their data that they're working with. So it tends to be adopted a lot quicker. So rather than train after go live at the end of the project, which was more traditional, we tend to say, well, let's do it before that step. Let's train people before we hit the go live button on these things. And then, of course, there's lots of ways of monitoring how things are going after that. Now, ShareGate's a great tool for that. They enhance on what Microsoft offer, but Microsoft have a lot of stuff in the admin center and usage reports, and even SharePoint site pages. You've got reports there on usage. But with ShareGate, you've got additional functionality and reporting that you can look into as well. That's within that licensing. And that's where some of the governance then can be set as well, because you've now got all these extra tools in the online environment that you didn't have in the SharePoint Server environment. You can start then applying those different things as well, like Charles said about sensitivity labels and things like that. So again, that can be talked about at the beginning and set in motion by Adepteq, but then afterwards it can be left to you then to manage and maintain that going forwards. So if we could just move on again, please, Charles.
Yeah, of course.
So July 2026 is approaching fast. So, we're starting to talk to people now about those migration plans, because if you've got quite a complex environment, you need to plan for it, and of course you need to budget for it as well. So there's an awful lot of benefits in the cloud that Charles has gone through and explained the details of that as why that's the best option for you. There is a product called SharePoint Subscription Edition, which is a SharePoint Server product, which is going to continue, but it's very difficult to get hold of because you'd have had to have software assurance previously on your SharePoint licensing. And the majority of people we spoke to haven't taken up that option. So the Microsoft Cloud is really your best bet for things. And like I say, it's future-proofing as well. Rather than your IT people having to spend time constantly patching, managing and maintaining, they can get on with the more interesting parts of their role. So if we plan early now, we can make sure that people are migrated before that deadline. So we work with ShareGate, and we've worked with ShareGate for a long time. So we would predominantly use their tool, but I say there are other tools out there as well, and we can talk to you about those other tools and options as well. So now, really, if we go on to the Q&A, if anyone has got any questions, if you'd like to move on again, please, Charles.
Yes.
Yeah. So if anyone has got any questions for the Q&A tab, that would be great.
Ian, based on your experience working with UK organizations, what's the biggest challenge companies face when planning their SharePoint migration? How do we help them overcome this kind of these challenges?
Well, a lot of it is understanding what they've got, and then understanding what Microsoft SharePoint Online offers. So there is a disconnect between the two. So like you said previously, when they upgraded from one version of SharePoint Server to the other, often they could just detach a database, reattach it to a brand new server environment into SQL, and up it all went. Everything worked. Fantastic. It's a bit more complex than that now, because solutions are being retired or deprecated. Then you need the new technologies. The good thing about that is well, it's something you're going to need to do at any point anyway to modernize your solutions. So now's a great time to think about that as part of that progress, move forward. But what we sometimes see is that it's such a complex environment that people have got, they get scared of it in a way. So it gets pushed down the road because it's going to be a big project, and it's going to need buying from senior. It's going to be need budgeting for, and it's going to need typically either additional software for the migration itself or professional services to assist, because the internal team won't have the skills to do it. So then it's weighing up, do we train the internal team for something that effectively they may do once and that's it, or do we bring in professionals that have worked and done these migrations many times before and have a breadth of experience? So that's sort of like the payoff that people have to work out internally as to which way that they want to go.
Okay. And maybe one last question before we end the session. I'm just curious. We had a bit of a conversation about this, and I'm thinking I know the answer, but for the organizations that are still hesitant today to complete the migration, what would you say is the tipping point when they decide to do the move? I'm hoping it's not what I'm thinking, but it's potentially that end of life actually happening. Is that it?
Yes. Well, we've seen that when SharePoint 2013 went end of life, that there were people that did not move over and got hit by that, and then either migrated to a later version of SharePoint Server, and it was a lot harder then to do that migration, or they moved into the cloud. But from SharePoint 2013 at that point into the cloud, again, was much more complex. There was a lot more changes. So planning early is key, and it's great that you've come along on this webinar and you've joined us today to understand more about it, so you can see the opportunity there as well as to what the environment could be that you go into and the benefits of having that. But yeah, the key thing is really starting to plan now, because July next year will come around very quickly.
Yeah, it's just over a year. I said it earlier, I think February, we're going to July 2026. So that's 15 months. I'm just going to pull some numbers here. As I prepared this presentation, I remembered an older one where we actually pulled some data on ShareGate users. There's a bunch of customers that do very small migrations. Within 3 months, they're done. But the bulk, they usually underestimate their migration project. I think the number was by 4 to 6 months, and that the average duration of migrations end up being 21 months. Well, if we're start now, 21 months brings us after end of support for SharePoint 2016 and 19. So that's why, once again, it's really time to start planning, to start moving, and explore tools like ShareGate to give you a better understanding. Contact experts like Adepteq to help you with that smoother transition. That's what we had for you today. I hope this brought some light to maybe some more obscure, criteria for this, and that it's mostly going to give you a bit more direction on what's happening next for your move as your SharePoint server comes to its end of life. Maybe you're already in the process. Maybe you just started planning. Maybe you're almost done with your migration, but still, keep in mind that July 2016 is that hard date for 2026 is the hard date for SharePoint 2016 and 19. And if I'm not mistaken, again, those info path forms, those SharePoint 2013 workflows, more or less at the same time end up being deprecated. So a few things to keep in mind as your company grows and businesses evolve. So thank you once again, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Yeah, thank you, Charles, and thank you everybody for attending. And I say we'll be in touch with the recording over the next couple of days. Thanks for your time, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.